Happy to have Dr. Paul Thomas here. He is a pediatrician and somewhat famous one at that. This is your blog. I'm just going to show everybody where they can find you, Dr. Paul. That's how you go by, right? Dr. Paul. And this is your personal journey. It says here you go to Paul Thomas, MD, if you're not familiar with Dr. Paul, and learn all about him. I was tipped off to your story by a subscriber, actually, who told me that you were, well, and I interview lots of doctors like this, so this basically is gobbledygook, doesn't mean a whole lot to me, but you are a danger to public health. So slow clap, I guess, right? Any doctor who's deemed a danger to public health is like, that's somebody I gotta talk to. Why don't we just first start there, just give people a little bit of background about what happened to you. We'll go back to your blog here too, and take it away, Dr. Paul. Give us the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah, my preferred site for people to find me is actually kidsfirstforever.com.
Okay, let me pull that up.
And it's the number 4.
Okay.
Also, I have a show, With the Wind, and that's at doctorsandscience.com. So those would be,
okay,
along with this one you just showed.
Kids First,
right, Kids First
Forever.
Forever, yep.
Okay.
ER, there you go. There we are.
Okay, I decline cookies. Go ahead.
You have to agree to that. It's weird. Anyway, there's links to everything I'm doing. But back to your question. You want to know, how far back would you like me to go with my story?
Well, let's go back to where the media, my old industry of like TV news, for instance, picked up your story. And I'll pull up an article so we can go over some of it, because I really want to talk to you about media coverage and how this has changed your opinion. Because the reason I was showing your blog is because you just wrote a blog where basically you say to people, it's about freedom. It was on July 4th. And you're like, if you want to regain your freedom, you gotta abandon, you said, most mainstream news. And you put news in quotes, which I guess means that you don't really think it's news. So I wanted to ask you about that. So let's start where the media picked up your story, where you became, a local Oregon celebrity, for better or worse.
Sure. Well, we had a move in Oregon, SB 422, I believe was the number of the bill, that was going to remove the right of parents to have a philosophical exemption against vaccines. So I saw that as a huge threat to the process of informed consent. So as a physician, doesn't matter what kind of physician you are recommending treatments. Whether if you're a surgeon, you might be recommending a surgery. If you're a pediatrician, you're recommending vaccines. Sometimes we're recommending medications or testing or whatever it might be. We're supposed to, number one, first do no harm. But when it comes to a procedure or anything that could be considered optional, in other words, it's not a 911, you've got to get you to the operating room because your child has appendicitis. In that case, you take care of the crisis. But 99.9% of what we do, it's not a crisis in that moment. The parent should be given the choice to decide whether or not they want to follow through with your recommendation as a doctor, right? So when it comes to vaccines, it's here's the risks, here's the benefits, and here are the alternatives, and you get to choose. And one of the alternatives for a medical procedure, which vaccines are a medical procedure, is that you hold off on doing them or you choose not to. That should be a parent's right. Well, that was currently in the United States, California, Maine, West Virginia, New York, and it was Mississippi, but they just changed their rules. Those 4 states, you cannot have your child go to school unless they're fully vaccinated according to the CDC schedule. And so Oregon was going down that road, and I was at the state capitol speaking to a crowd of, 1,000 or so, maybe 2,000 people. And that put me on the radar because I was saying that, we need to stop this bill. Parents need to have the right to choose. I don't know did you stumble on the Willamette Week article about me?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I was going to pull that up.
So Willamette Week did a real hack job on me. Their reporter called me and she had learned that I had some research. Well, I had some very important research findings. The unvaccinated kids in my practice were extremely healthy compared to the vaccinated ones. Unvaxxed kids just did a lot better, less autism, less ADD, ADHD. And she implied or pretended that she was interested in this research. So I said, sure, I'll give you an interview. And she interviewed me for an hour or two and then wrote this just horrendous piece of, hard to call it journalism. Yeah, that's the picture. And, slanderous. When you use the term anti-vaccine, that's slander, because that's not true. In my practice, I was still vaccinating at that time. In fact, my practice was vaccinating up to the end, but we honored informed consent. And so, needless to say, a lot of twists to the truth in that particular article. And that was the last time I agreed to do an interview where I don't have control of the words that are being used that are supposed to be mine. So in other words, I'll do a live interview like this with you because my words are my words. I mean, hopefully you won't go after the fact and, chop and piece it together and have me sound like I'm saying something that I'm not saying. But after that experience with Willamette Week, it was like, okay, I'm done with those type of interviews. The media there has an agenda. They had one narrative that they wanted to get out there. And that's been fairly true for the last, as long as I can remember, but it's really escalated this past few years. I've been in this childhood vaccine realm as a pediatrician my whole career, became aware that we had problems with it back in 2000, 2001. And then it really ramped up. By 2007, I actually left my practice and started my own practice called Integrative Pediatrics for the very reason that my partners at that time said it was unethical not to give the entire CDC schedule. And I was saying it's unethical to give a baby a hepatitis B vaccine when their mother does not have hepatitis B. Since you catch hepatitis B from sex and IV drug use, babies don't do that. So we had a parting of the ways. I started my new practice, and then I started observing this phenomenon of unvaxxed kids being so incredibly healthy.
I never really quite understood that. We've had 2 kids and they come with the injection right after you give birth, and it just doesn't make any sense. And when you ask them about it, you realize that it's just what hospital systems do, I guess, which is they take worst case scenario and treat everybody exactly that way. Like they don't consider you an individual. And that's how I think healthcare is nowadays in general. Like it's not about you. It seems like it's about liability, social conformity, and hubris, and then just treating everybody as worst possible case scenario, which like you're saying, I mean, it has damaging effects for people who are generally healthy. Right. Hey, my son needed to have an intervention for dehydration when he had diarrhea, for a couple, he's only 5 months old. He got an IV fluid. I think that's what emergency rooms and doctors are great for nowadays. I'm the daughter of 2 doctors. Yeah. I'm not trying to hate on them, but I wouldn't go to them really for anything chronic anymore. I just don't find them to be on the side of curiosity when it comes to just understanding like basic health. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really good point. And it's all profit motive driven. The vaccine industry has gotten a special pass. The Childhood Immunization Act of 1986 basically removed liability from the vaccine manufacturers, from those of us who administer vaccines. Basically, you have a product that not only has no liability, but it's mandated. And the extent to which there are ill effects, side effects, it's huge, but people don't know that. So what most people are told by their pediatrician is, oh, it's a 1 in a million chance of anything bad happening. And it's so much worse than that. So much worse than that.
All right. I'm already thinking there's probably 3 things that I'm going to get my channel suspended for, but that's okay. We're going to go into your blog where you wrote Reclaiming Freedom, a reflection on independence, rights, and resilience in challenging times. So this is what I saw that piqued my interest. And first off, it's interesting you grew up in Rhodesia. That would be something we could talk about in a minute. But you're saying here, place your trust in sources of information that have taken a stand for freedom and paid a high price to stand for truth and justice. If you're reading this, you are on the right track. Platforms that censor need to be abandoned and thus marginalized. That includes most mainstream news, where talking heads read teleprompters of information sent to them by the masters of information, disinformation, and propaganda. Who do you think are the masters of misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda?
So I'm not an expert on that topic. However, you're in journalism, and you probably know, having worked in that field, that the information from the AP press, right? That comes down. There are only a handful of very wealthy people, my understanding is, who own the major sources of information going out, right? So these conglomerates have bought up all the main channels. And that's why it's almost hilarious, but you can flip the channel and hear the exact same messaging. I mean, the exact same words being spoken by reporter after reporter after reporter on different networks. So they're reading the same piece. And it feels like, and maybe you can even comment on this, investigative journalism, which was something that I think was so important to expose issues, right? When there's a problem that's not being properly addressed, a good journalist would go out and investigate, and then they could report on it. Well, you might have heard of the story of Del Bigtree, who was working for the Doctor's Show, and he was investigating vaccines. That's that hot topic that you're not supposed to talk about, and he was forbidden to do so. So he left and started his own show, The High Wire. And I understand you got in a little hot water for some reason and here you are with your own show, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not going to follow the narrative that the authorities want you to follow, then you will be somehow dismissed, punished, removed from your position. In medicine for doctors, it's medical boards that have the power. They have the power to remove your license. And they have a very interesting game, I would call it. It's not a game, but it's a very serious business. In the past, medical boards would challenge a doctor's license if that doctor was, for example, practicing under the influence of drugs or alcohol, especially if you were doing surgery, or perhaps molesting your patients while they were under anesthesia. These were typical classic reasons that a doctor would be disciplined and potentially lose their license. Today, it's morphed into a sort of policing of what you say and what you do to conform. Now, when you call something quality medicine, you're conform. They have this called standard of care. If we never change the standard of care, medicine would be stuck at whatever moment we said this is it, right? I mean, that makes sense. We're always innovating, we're always finding better ways. This is where that concept of the science is settled is ridiculous. Science is never settled because we're always finding new information, trying to make things better. Well, in the case of a doctor's license, I ended up basically losing mine for, as you pointed out at the beginning of our talk, I was a threat to public health, so they needed to remove my license. Now, what triggered me being a threat to public health is very interesting. Number one, it was that I was offering informed consent. But number two, it was that I was publishing data and information that was counter to the narrative that vaccines are safe and effective. And that was a huge threat to a big cash cow, the whole vaccine industry.
All right, we're going to go into that in detail, everybody. You're going to have to go to one of my other platforms. If you're watching this on YouTube, we are going to be still live on Rumble, ROKFIN, and Locals, so I hope to see you there. Don't forget, if you love wine and you want to support my work and keep bringing people like Dr. Paul on, go to AllisonMorrow.locals.com. Wait, that's where you can go to my editorial board. But if you want to drink while you're on my editorial board, you got to go to AllisonWinePromo.com. High altitude extremist altitude Malbecs. Danger to your public health Malbecs, I guess. I don't know. Dr. Paul, I always tell people, because nowadays anybody's an extremist who's doing anything other than just sitting in their grandma's basement. So I say, if you want to be an extremist, but you don't want to go to federal prison, then you can try these wines, because they're from extremist altitude regions of Argentina. Almost 9,000 feet in the middle, 6,000, the ones on the left and the right, natural fermentation, zero filtration, hand harvested grapes, all that good stuff. So go check them out. AllisonWinePromo.com. You get 50% off the wine and 50% off shipping. It's a great way to support my sponsors. Tell companies that don't censor and don't tell me what I can or cannot say, or my guests can or cannot say, that you appreciate what they do. And you also get great wine to drink while you're at it. You can also go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison and get some USDA certified organic roast. There's light roast, there's dark roast, and there's also a Katura tea, which is very good. I will show it to you. I cold brew mine. It's a tea that's around the coffee fruit. It's like black tea. It's very good. Cold brew mine 24 hours, but you could also do hot brew if you want. I think it's better cold. And a little lemon, maybe some monk fruit sweetener. My dad won't do monk fruit sweetener because he says it's from China. It's probably laced with something. But anyway, if you're not worried about it, then you could do that too. Okay, thanks everybody who has been watching on YouTube. We are going to be on the other platforms. We're going to go a little deeper into vaccines, childhood vaccines, which I found, Dr. Paul, that in today's COVID era, there are a lot of people willing to question COVID vaccines, but when you get to childhood vaccines, that's where people start to get really creeped out still. So we're going to hit it. See you guys over there.